Okay, welcome back. It's been a fair while since I've done a video. Lots of things going on. As you can see, I've moved things around in the shed. The Stag is now back in the back section with the Escort out in the front to give me a bit more space. Let's go through a few of the things that we've done. Let's start at the front. So, I'm really happy with the basic shapes. There's still, it's nowhere near perfect, but the shapes, how the tyre sits in the guards, the shape of the guard, I'm really happy with all of that. There's a couple of things I'm contemplating on how to run with this front guard. I like the vent down the back to let the high pressure out from that wheel arch. It's fairly subtle from the side, you can't really tell. So that's what I wanted. Rear's starting to look really good. There's still some shaping issues and that too. I need to make some more clearance down here in the front. Some shaping issues and that I need to do with that rear guard. But at this stage what I need to do is get the rear suspension mounted in properly before I can really go any further. So that's our next step. So what I've discovered is I've currently got the suspension set where I can get caster and cambers wheel aligned in basically the right position, and the wheel in that position is now 40 mil low. So I need to get in under here and I need to get this rear suspension out and remake my cradle so that I can lift that whole rear suspension cradle up another 40 mil into the car, which is actually beneficial for us. That'll help us. I want to get a flat floor underneath this to try to tidy up airflow underneath the car. I don't want to run any aero on the top surfaces, so I don't want big wings or anything like that. I want it fairly subtle. So I'm planning on running a flat floor underneath, which will be bolt-in panels to create a flat floor. So raising up this rear cradle 40 mil is actually going to help me get that flat floor underneath and then be able to create a diffuser up underneath the boot. So for those following along, what we have here is a full independent rear suspension out of a Porche 996 911. We've had to narrow it a fair bit. Here's the original cross member that would bolt in there. So that's the original cross member. That is now taken place by this temporary steel one. So as you can see, we've narrowed it quite a bit because the Escort's quite narrow, and being a modern car, it has quite big offset wheels, whereas I would like to run something with a little bit of dish, which causes us to narrow it further. So that's fairly easy in this case. I'm going to need to make a new cross member there, and we're going to need to shorten drive shafts, which shouldn't be too much of an issue. Got to change the inner CV joints anyway to suit the diff I have. Oops. To suit the diff I have, which at this stage is a 411 R200 diff out of a Nissan Skyline LSD. So I'm going to need to incorporate mounts for it when I build that new cross member properly, and change the drive shafts to suit. The next step here is I need to adjust my jig. At the moment I'm using the sway bar bolt to hold it in the back. So I need to lift that up by about 40 mil. The fun of working in a carport. Just had a big shower come through, and my carport's been getting wet for a while and I haven't known why. And I was just out in the shed now when a big storm came through, and I discovered that my neighbour's carport gutter was overflowing straight inside my carport. So hopefully a couple of cable ties, that won't happen again. Get this dried out and we'll be able to get some more work done. I think it's time for a cuppa. That's lifted and braced. That's up 40 mil from where it was. 40 mil from where it was. Now I can get actually access to all those bolts, which is good because I couldn't before. So now I need to get this back in the car. So I think it's time, with 40 mil higher, I think it's time to take this section of the boot out. I've been trying to work around it, but got to the point where it's just got to come out. So let's get that out. That'll make it easier to get this cradle back in. Okay, so that's the wheel back in at ride height. Suspension back in. We're a long way up inside the boot, but that's fine. So I'm going to have to make chassis rails to pick up from here up onto the two mounts back down at the front. Fairway inside. That's okay. The wheels just sitting outside the standard chassis rail position. Everything else is outboard. There's not a lot of clearance on the top. This is where my next step is to get this mounted in, so that then I can move the tyre up and down through its travel and check clearances before I finalise the final shape of the guards, which are close. So that rear quarter is out about 2 inches at the style line through where the tape is. I've had to cut and shut 2 wheel arches and modify it a little bit to get a little bit bigger opening for the 18s. Bottom point of that sill comes out a long way. It's all cut in underneath to get out to the tyre. So the front's probably not quite out as far as the rears. May need to go a little bit further yet. But I'll finalise the rear suspension, and then that'll finalise the front. Okay, so rear suspension's back in, back and centred. So I've placed this bar that's central to the car. So centred there, centred up into the middle, right? And from here to those suspension points are equal. So we centred left to right. We centred front to back from the sill here to the mounts on both sides. So we're forward and back, we're square in the car. The other thing we've done is these bushes here mount so the bolt is perpendicular to the ground, so the face of the bush is actually parallel with the ground. So we've set all that up so that we parallel across those bushes. Straight edge over that. So we're parallel over those bushes, touching all the way where our bowl is just touching the back line at the level, which is from our datum, which is because this slab's not flat. So we are parallel off our datum, which is my bottom rail of my jig. And that's measured up off of a standard Porche. That's where it needs to be. So I need 18 mil of spacing on the rear. I need the chassis rail to be 18 mil lower here than at the top mount, which is almost exactly in line with the original floor height. So the next step is to design some chassis rails. So I'm going to have to trim this back a little bit further so that we can kink a chassis rail in to pick up that point, and there's a third point over the front there. So I'm going to have to pick up a chassis rail. I need to get the rail out around that section, pick up that mount, up to that mount, through, and then back into the chassis rail. So that's the next step. Some cardboard templates, start making up some rails. Okay, so back into it this morning. Last night I ducked back out and did some CAD work, some cardboard aided design to create the base of what's going to be the new chassis rail. So in under here I've made a riser to get that point up to there, and that will be the bottom. So our next step is to take that and convert that into steel. Okay, so this is our little homemade bender. Just clamps in the vise. Works really well. Sample piece. A little knife cut. Everything goes into there. And we can clamp it down. Simply bend. Works a treat. So have a look at this one. Mark out where we want our bends. That one needs to go the other way. Okay, so 2 spaces. Time to go bolt those in. See if they'll work. Okay, that's where I'm going to have to stop for this evening because I want to get these bolt holes drilled so that I can actually bolt that section in to get my alignments for the next sections. And I don't have a big enough drill bit here to be able to do that. So I'm going to have to go visit a mate's place, but that's actually starting to look like it's going to fit quite nicely there. So I want to get these two mounting points fixed and bolted in at that point before I look at bending the front, so I can create some location. So that's going to be me for the night. We'll see ya.
It's got to be HPG. Sure, chocolate might taste good, but if it's feel goods you're after these Easter holidays, then see Sexyland for 20% off.
Okay, so after getting the chassis rails in, well, the first section of the rails in, I noticed that they looked crooked or lopsided to one another. And what I discovered was that the passenger side was 5mm. Everything was actually skewed slightly to the driver's side. So once I pulled the front across and got everything parallel, I then discovered that the passenger side was rearward 5mm from the driver's side. So left hand side was rearward 5mm from the right hand side. So using some washers in behind my bracket down here, so put some washers in there to space that forward 5mm, and after lots of juggling and moving and levering and rotating my jig, I'm now happy with the exact position of the suspension in the cross member. So we're parallel and in position of the car within 0.5mm as I can measure. So anything that's out there, we should be able to deal with wheel alignments. So at this point, I can continue and keep bending up my front side. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so I've just put the next couple of bends in my bottom chassis rail, and if I bring that down to touch on my spacer, I'm a little bit close to this point. So I want that spacer to come up a little bit. And if I use a piece of 6mm, squash that down, I get quite nice clearance there. So I think I'm going to have to make my spacers 6mm longer, which is perfectly fine. So need to space them up 6mm. So let's get that done, and then I can work on the next step. Space is adjusted, another 6mm put on that just to increase the length. I also discovered that these faces weren't perpendicular to the bolts, so I was able to sort them out while I was at it. So let's bolt these back in the car and see where they sit. Well, I'm all done for the weekend. Bottom of the chassis rails, all in. They're actually looking fairly good. So next step will be cardboard templating the sides so that we can start doing the sides. I need to machine up some sections for here where it mounts. I want to run essentially cross tube all the way through the chassis rail that the bolt bolts into, so that I can transfer the loads all the way through the rail, not just work on the bottom face. It's It's probably overkill, but better to be safe than sorry. So for now, that's done.